Hello, this is Adam Halbert from the Communist Report, and today we're going to be covering Marxism, its history, and its effect on Europe, starting with Karl Marx himself. He was a German man who went to the University of Berlin and was exiled from Prussia because he expressed his liberal views, and there he went to London in 1849. From there, he met Engels, who was also a German working middle-class man in London who published The Conditions of the Working Class. This created a devastating picture of the working class in London at the time. From there, together, they went on to work for the Communist League, and from there, they wrote the Communist Manifesto. This expressed ideas that they thought, such as a propertyless society, a classless society, a society with social equality, a rise of the proletariat, and also that their views against capitalism and rejecting other liberal reforms. They also came up with the name Communism because it seemed more radical than other socialist names. Marx himself was also influenced by three major philosophical thoughts at the time. The first being German Hegelianism. He was influenced by the philosopher Hegel and his thought about a thesis bringing about an antithesis into a synthesis forming another thesis. Another socialist reform was French utopian socialism. This criticized capitalist society and also pictured a propertyless society, two in which Marx himself highly agreed with. He also agreed with British classical economics, which used scientific examination of the industrial workforce. From this, he came up with the fate of the proletariat. The proletariat was the working class. He thought of the fate of the proletariat being the fate of humanity, the liberation of the proletariat being the liberation of humanity. And from this, he also wrote Das Kapital in 1864, which showed the inequality and suffering brought upon by capitalism and how capitalism would self-destruct itself, bringing the triumph of communism and the triumph of the proletariat. From this, we can look at a class conflict expressed by communism between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. Obviously, capitalism was a big opposition to communism and Karl Marx's thoughts. He believed that there needed to be a society without capitalism, without property, and without class. This, he believed, would be seen through a rise of the proletariat. The proletariat was the working class, and he believed that their liberation would be the liberation of humanity and would be the culmination of human history. Now, after looking at the thoughts of Karl Marx, we can come to look at its effects across Europe during that time and during many different time periods after Karl Marx's death and after him expressing his beliefs. We can start this by looking at Stalin, Lenin, and the USSR. Lenin, in 1917, through the Bolshevik Revolution and killing 8 million people, implemented communism as the form of government in Russia. Lenin interpreted Marxism rather than following it directly. From this, after Lenin, Stalin also went on to interpret Lenin. Although Marxism can be seen as successful in some views, it can also be seen as a failure. As Marxism spread throughout the Cold War era and throughout the 20th century evolved, leaders and people who adopted communist thought deviated from Karl Marx's ideas progressively as more countries adopted communism. From there, we can see how Stalin himself adopted brutal violence, of such which Karl Marx would most likely disagree with, as Lenin and Stalin combined killed around 28 million people. From there, communism also affected Europe. In Eastern Europe, in 1945, communism also took over Poland and Hungary. From there were puppet governments used by Stalin and the USSR to provide an iron curtain against Europe. From there, communism also spread to East Berlin. This was a major part of the Cold War and one of the many culminations of the war. East Berlin was less industrialized, and the people there were much different and much less happy than the people in the opposing West Berlin. When East and West Berlin were both liberated and the Berlin Wall was put down, the true effect of communism was seen through society as it was truly compared to capitalism and its successes. From this, we can be brought to China. Mao Zedong, the Chinese leader, deviated from Marxism as well, interpreting Marxist-Leninism. From this, we see Mao going through his great leap forward, his belief of a transition from an agrarian to a communist, to a more industrialized society. From this, 45 million people died of famine and other causes in approximately 4 years. His deviation from Marxism can be frowned upon greatly by Karl Marx himself, as he deviated heavily from Marxism, and the amount of murder he committed can never be looked upon in a positive view by Karl Marx. Also now, Xi Jinping, the president of China, is also forming a capitalist-communist hybrid in China itself. This can also not be looked upon positively by Marx, as a rise of the proletariat would bring the liberation of society and crush the bourgeoisie, but instead a society with capitalism and communism would not be looked upon positively. Looking after all of these facts, we can decide if communism did succeed. And communism, in thought, did not succeed very well. Communism was interpreted in many different forms by dictators. This did not promote Marxism and did not keep the true values Karl Marx showed in his Communist Manifesto. China and the USSR embraced communism, followed by Vietnam and other countries such as Cuba, but they deviated further from Karl Marx's views. Communism also turned into a symbol of terror for the world. This can be seen from the Khmer Rouge, where 1/4 of the population died by Pol Pot in Cambodia. Also, the Kim dynasty in North Korea and their terror against their people. Stalin's rule and the death of 20 million people in the USSR, and Mao Zedong's killing of 45 million in the Great Leap Forward in China. In turn, Marxism and communism was a failure because his original views of a rise of the proletariat and equality in society, classless and propertyless and non-capitalistic, was not seen. Karl Marx believed the liberation of the proletariat would be seen in the closest revolution to his works, the Revolution of 1848. However, it was not seen, and was only seen until 1917, when leaders interpreted Marxism and deviated further and further away. This has been Adam Helmy of the Communist Report, and this has been the story of Marxism and its effect on Europe and the world.